I'm Sheldon Rothblatt, a professor of history emeritus at UC Berkeley, contributing to the legacy program, which is so wonderful because someday somebody's going to write a marvelous history of the University of California based on all of these interviews. And it is a special honor for me, not only to be part of this program, but to interview my really lifelong friend and very dear friend, Edwin M. Epstein. Ed, I know a great deal about you, and I'm going to let you talk about yourself as well. But let's start in the way that we really began. And a long time ago, what was it, 1960s?
Yeah.
You tell the story. You tell the story.
No, I think it's better if you tell the story.
Right,
How we first met.
I'll tell the story. We didn't know it, but we lived in the same neighborhood, and we were taking the same bus down to the campus. And for some reason, we found ourselves sitting next to one another, right?
Right.
And I was, as I was going to be the rest of my life, and you were, as you're going to be the rest of your life. I was morose, and you were jolly, wonderful, helpful, and wanting to talk. And I remember on that particular day, I didn't want to talk. And here was this chap who wants to talk. At any rate, we got over that, and life went on, and we spent a great deal of time together. Our families have grown up together. And here we are, many, many years later, in another century.
That's right.
It's quite extraordinary. One hardly believes it. At any rate, let's go back to that bus ride and listen. What are you doing here? I might have said. What is your connection? Or I don't remember how I got over my morose mood. You know, it was.
I mean, you have to understand. This was in 1964 that this all took place, and I said effectively that I've just come to the campus. I'm a lecturer in the well, it wasn't the Haas school in those days, but just the School of Business Administration. My wife and my family have just come with, we've just come within the last few weeks. And we're getting to know Berkeley and the campus. How about yourself?
Yeah, so what did I tell you? I have no idea. At any rate, it was most unusual because you were a lawyer. And you had a graduate of Yale, but you'd also been a clerk, I think, in the Philadelphia Supreme Court or something of the sort. Yeah.
Pennsylvania Supreme Court.
Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And you had, so now you were embarking on something different, and you had to really explain that to me. But I think you had in mind, didn't you, that you were going to come to Berkeley and get a doctorate in political science? Was that in the...
Well, what it was, the arrangement was that I would be teaching full-time as a lecturer, meant 2 classes a semester. We were back then, we were in the semester system before switching and then switching back. And also I would pursue graduate studies in political science, which was sort of my undergraduate major and what my interests really were, politics, law, sort of a fusion of two. And this was in '64, and God, I always wished that I had come a year earlier. So I would have seen Berkeley in what I call the antebellum period, before all hell broke loose, and just had a chance to see what the campus had been like. And this is the course in which I started out. It's not, despite all the romanticism that attaches to the free speech movement and the opening up of a campus in terms of issues that related to speech and also relative how far administrative leadership and decisions would go. Students felt very much out of the picture at that time in terms of decision-making on the campus. and its long-term effects. Free speech movement was very, very important, not just in Berkeley, but elsewhere. But it wasn't easy for someone who was just coming and pursuing a full-time graduate program and also teaching full-time and moving in a family that had never been in California until we set foot to come to Berkeley. And it wasn't an easy time. And there's a little bit preamble. I think that's necessary to our coming. That's when I've thought of doing a memoir, which I've not done. I would call it The Accidental Academic, because I never intended to be an academic. I knew from the age of 13, I was going to be a Philadelphia lawyer and a CPA. And unlike my two older brothers, I had no particular interest in, and I had no particular abilities in, the so-called STEM, what we would call STEM subjects today, mathematics, the sciences, things of this nature. And law just was something that intuitively came to me. And that's how I started out. I graduated from my high school. I graduated from Yale Law School and did a judicial clerkship, and then started practicing with a law firm in Philadelphia. And at the same time, once again, serendipity played its role. I'm a great believer in serendipity in life's course of unfolding. I had lunch with a professor of mine at Penn, who was chair of what was then the business law department. And a few weeks later, I had a phone call from him saying that a man who was supposed to teach an 8 o'clock course, introductory course, had a heart attack and died. Would I be willing to teach the 8 o'clock course? And I thought about it and checked with the firm with which I was also just about to start. And they said, yeah, sure, it's okay, as long as you are able to fulfill your responsibilities here. So I started, and I found that I enjoyed the teaching and had good results with students. But also, I started to see something that was occurring in law, but also in other professions, medicine particularly, that I could see, and that is that these professions were transitioning much more into businesses. It's not that there weren't business considerations and practicing law before this or practicing medicine, but it was really transitioning into what we know today as legal practice and medical practice. And I'm not sure that this is what I had bargained for. I had, I guess, almost romantic notions, or someone put it somewhat, if you will, idealistic, if not naive notions of what a lawyer was or should be, and many are today still. That is what the Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, in swearing in my cohort and me, reminded us. He said, "You were officers of the court, first and foremost, and have an obligation, a responsibility to the law, to the legal process, legal system." And my instinct told me that I wasn't going to be very comfortable with the business aspects of legal practice. At the same time, when I was teaching at the Wharton School, a colleague of mine came to a conference in Berkeley. First conference that was dealing specifically with the subject of business and society, the social, political role of business, as opposed to what the focus in business schools traditionally was, and that is the economic side of things. And he said that they were looking for, a young lawyer who had an interest in social science and would be prepared to teach and also do graduate work in whatever field he was interested in. There were no she's in the conversation at that time. And Sandra and I talked it over in terms of whether I should look into this, and I did, and sent my materials, which fortunately included a paper growing out of my law school studies that had just appeared in a law journal. I sent that on and sent it to Dow Votaw, who became my mentor, my closest friend, professional partner, and we did a book together, and sent it on to Berkeley, and they said, well, they'd like to have me come out as a lecturer. And all these academic distinctions didn't mean very much to me at that time, because I didn't grow up starting out as a PhD student and socialized in academic life and knew all the gradations of positions and things of this nature. And, Sandra and I talked it over, and wonderful wife support, wise person, talked it over and said, look, we're young, let's take the risk, because it was a risk. I had promise of a very fine career in Philadelphia as a lawyer. Well, a lot of things going for me. And we did it. We came out with our 3-year-old daughter, drove across the country, arrived in what for us was terra incognito. I'd never been to California, had no idea of anything relating to it. I knew exactly one person who was here, Al Fishlow, who was a very distinguished professor of economics. I knew him from high school.
Soon, Ed, you found yourself sitting on the bus,
right,
with someone whom you didn't know at the time was a law school dropout. That was me. And who also applied to be an academic and ended up there. I was going to come back to the free speech movement in the 1960s a little bit later as we reflect on what has happened at the university. But listening to you now, I think I might just like to pause for a minute. I came to teach in the Berkeley. I was at Cambridge University. I came to teach in the Berkeley campus in 1963. So I had 1 year on you. Right. And I was completely taken by surprise because that wasn't what academia was like. Confrontations, angers, I thought in terms of, you might, as you use, the word you use, an idealistic sort of view of the academic community as a mutually reinforcing collegial environment. Sure. So here you come to the Berkeley campus, you paired yourself as a lawyer, you found dissatisfaction with the way in which the legal profession was bending. I should say that knowing you as well as I do, these more than idealistic moral concerns you have for the integrity of business enterprise in a modern society has stayed with you all your life. But you were focused somewhat differently. You were focused on that outside community, and suddenly the student movements of the 1960s force us to look inwards into our own community. You were not prepared for an academic life, right? But
Right.
you were in one now.
Right.
You had not really been teaching much. You taught at Wharton and so on, but you hadn't been long in the field.
Right.
What was your, suddenly all of this is happening. You came with a different intention in mind. You came with different goals in mind. And now you are really forced to think about the nature of a university and what it is. What were your thoughts? And as the 60s, 64, 65, you know?
Going on. Well, my first thought was, how am I going to survive in all this? Because, as I mentioned, I was doing graduate work, I was teaching, we had a young family, we're trying to transition into a totally new life for us. My first thought is, you know, how am I going to survive in all this? And it was a very, you know, very, very difficult period. And it also, this whole notion of seeing departments and relationships getting torn apart. And this is not what I expected within an academic institution.
But did it shake your confidence in this new world to which you just arrived? Or did it strengthen a kind of resolve to say, I'm going to make a contribution to this in the positive ways of which I think it ought to go?
Well, I think it was really the latter. I made a commitment to ourselves, meaning Sandra and myself, to give this thing a go. I already was investing time and effort and money. It was Shelley and Sheldon, you know very well. There were no tuition breaks for faculty members, so I paid every penny that anyone else in the state of California paid. So, I mean, it was really a commitment that we had made, and I guess I wanted to see it through to the next step.
So did that next step involve a growing conception of what a university really ought to be, should be, and you were going to work towards that goal? Did that next step involve?
I don't know if I consciously saw myself as a knight in shining armor that was going to come and rescue us from the dragons that were circulating there. But I had taken the step. I wanted to pursue it. I wanted to obviously see if indeed I could make it in this particular career slot. And but I know where you're leading, Sheldon, because I became over the years very active on the campus, academic senate and other things. Ultimately, in the late 1980s, I chaired the Senate for 2 years, and I've always been identified as someone who's been very active in the life of the Berkeley campus. So maybe while all this was going on in the 60s, I wasn't consciously thinking in those directions, but I guess was part of my gestalt, if you will, or it's the Yiddish expression in my neshama, sort of just who I was, what I was. Yeah. I'd always been active in high school and undergraduate in the affairs of whatever campus I was, and so it sort of came naturally, I guess, the only way I can put it.
There's been a consistency, Ed, in your life. You know, we look back on our lives and we wonder if there's been any kind of consistency, as you said before. It was kind of serendipitous. You didn't really know what was going to happen next. None of us really do. And yet, you know, when we write a biography or an autobiography, sometimes we find threads in there that really persist. So here you've just said that you always were kind of active. And your own writing went into the public role of businesses, right? This
right.
headed us, as I recall, from what people said at the time, because it wasn't my own subject, but it was a pioneering work. You were saying things about the public role of business that hadn't really been said in the literature. And you've always had this outer look to the wider role that you could play. Leadership was going to come with it, and you certainly exhibited that in any number of ways. Starting with the time we were both happened to be deans of students at the same time, didn't we? That was interesting. I'm not so sure that was leadership at the time, but picking up the pieces from the 1960s. But you certainly went on to chair the academic senate and take a major role in collegial government. You ran for city office in Berkeley at one time, right? It's anomalous in a sense, but it fits in with the pattern of your outer looking, doesn't it? Yeah. And let's just pause for a minute and tell everybody why you did that, why you decided to run for office.
It all goes back to serendipity. Serendipity meaning that when I was in law school, well, yes, between my second and third year, I worked in the legal counsel's office of the Aetna Insurance Company as a summer intern type of thing. And I was asked to work on a project, whether it was legal for the Aetna to make a contribution to a bipartisan debate between two candidates for, use the California term, for the assembly. And they asked me to research this. And it really tied into my interest in business. Well, not really, in politics and law. And then when it came to Cal, I had to come up with to do the MA, come up with a thesis. And I looked at campaign contributions, which was really the issue in the project at the Aetna, and looked at legislation, federal legislation relating to campaign contributions, which was sort of very antedated, and looked at it in the context of what impact it had. And that became a monograph. My running for office, once again, I guess it was just serendipity of an event. In the spring of, it was 1984, there was a proposition in Berkeley, which was effectively censorship of the state of Israel, that Berkeley should not do business with the state of Israel. And we formed a coalition among very disparate aspects of the Berkeley community. We had, in fact, a two-party system, ABC and BCA, the people who were what we considered the progressives today's political terms. And even though they were more than progressives, it was pretty radical. And the other one were the moderates, the people, moderates, okay. And we had this, and willy-nilly, I came out as the leader of the coalition opposing this proposition. And we defeated it. And I had never intended to be active in politics other than as a voter, marginal contributor, that type of thing, financial contributor. So I came out and I became the leader of it. How that occurred exactly, I can't even tell you, but it did occur. And we won, and it's terrific. Then a few months later, I had a visit by the three progressive, by the 4 progressive members of the city council. And one of them was not going to run again. He was the single white male who wasn't going to run again. We had black male, we had 2 women on the council, 2 white women, and they came to me and said, we saw what you were able to do with regard to the proposition. Would you consider running for city council? We need someone to replace the incumbent who's not going to run. And I mean, I never thought about running for city council.
But you did.
I did. I discussed it. I discussed it with Sandra, and I guess thought, well, I should go for it. Why not?
Okay, so let's skip ahead a little bit.
Right.
You did pretty well. You didn't win, but you did pretty well. Okay.
I have a wonderful story regarding that.
You would have taken the hills. Had we had the system we have today in Berkeley, you would have been on the council. Yeah, but it was a citywide.
Citywide at that time.
But you want to tell the story? Because I have another question for you.
Okay. The story is that I decided to run, and I did. And I did everything that a candidate does. You visit churches, you, of course, go around to groups, you things of this nature. And election night came after the votes had been cast. And my son, Dan, who is now, for the last 20 plus years, has been in the State Department. And it was a freshman at Pitzer College. And he kept on calling every half hour, how are the votes coming in? How are the votes coming in? And at the beginning, I guess the Hill area was counted among the first, and I was doing very, very well. But as the votes kept on coming in to the larger city of Berkeley, it was very clear that I was going to lose. And so when finally all the votes were counted, and he called again, and I told him that I had come in 5th, indeed beating the other 3 incumbents with whom I was running. I came in 5th, and all 4 were elected. He thought for a moment, and he said, the only thing worse than coming in 5th would have been had you come in 4th.
Had you come in 4th. Yeah.
Because it would have been a fool's errand. There would have been 7-1 plus the mayor, and I'm out there sort of standing alone. So I thought it was a very astute comment.
Wonderful. All right, so now let's do a little bit of counterfactual, what we call counterfactual history, all right? What if you had won and gone into the tumultuous arena of Berkeley politics? What would that have meant with respect to your academic commitments, which were also strong? And by then, they were also international. You were abroad, you had been teaching abroad, you had connections abroad, you had visitors continually from abroad. So you had the strong research university academic position.
Right.
There you are on the city council. Well, what is that going to mean?
Well, of course, who knows? It's an all-consuming proposition.
Yeah.
I would teach my classes just as I did when I was heading up this coalition against the opposing the anti-Israeli proposition. I would have done that. I don't know what it would have meant for my research. It might be that it would have been a hiatus to which I would come back. But then again, here once again, all these things that have occurred were sort of serendipitous.
You've had this public motivation to be in the public arena, but not for personal reasons. I know you too well, for those moral reasons. The feeling that there was something wrong or something that could be corrected out there, and that you might be able, in the way we think about it, do something about it. Okay. With respect to business, you have already formulated this whole idea about the culture of business and its moral and public responsibilities. The public responsibility, business have a public responsibility besides money making. You were really deeply concerned with that. Now, in the university, we certainly were caught up in a great many moral dilemmas that we were working through as a consequence of issues that had been raised in the 60s. Now, in the city, suppose you'd been in the city of Berkeley, the council, what public role, besides just serving, what mission do you think you might have had in your mind about your duty towards the civic culture?
I think given the political structure of Berkeley as it turned out to be, I would have been a representative of what I would call Berkeley Center, and certainly not the progressive wing. In Berkeley, a lot of people forget today. In the 1960s, the mayor was what we would call a conservative, and there was a conservative tone or component to the council. And I guess I would see myself as someone to try to bring parties together, to try to develop a consensus in terms of areas of public policy, to work together, to try to make improvements in areas where the city needed improvement.
Well, that is the answer that I was hoping you would give, because that really defines you. You have always been, it's just that from that moment you sat on the bus, you wanted to bring me out of my morose mood into the wider world of sort of conviviality. You've been that sort of person. You've been a person with warmth and generosity towards others, trying to bring people together to heal wounds. Now, if we come back to your academic world, you made a shift that was really quite unusual.
Right.
That is, while being a Berkeley professor, you left the campus. You're still a Berkeley professor, but you left and you took another position.
Right.
A leadership position in a small Roman Catholic college in the Bay Area.
St. Mary's College. May I do something here and take a great leap back? So you don't in a sense, you can't understand who I am with going back to the very beginning. I'll do this in a very brief way. I'm first generation American born. My parents came from Ukraine, from Russia in 1921, when it became obvious that for Jews it was not going to be any better under the communists, under the Soviets, than it was under the Tsar. They were able to emigrate. They met in citizenship preparation program. They're married, had a son 2 years later, and I came along as the third son, actually 13 years later. And so I'm the child of immigrants, and to a very hardworking family. My father was an accountant, and father was an accountant, and it was made very clear to my brothers and me that our future in America was going to be dependent on how we did academically. That would be the entree to colleges and graduate schools and all this sort of thing. And hard work and good grades were the coin of the realm. Okay. So, and yeah, that's the way it went from a wonderful high school, all academic, and it's had a very strong place in Philadelphia culture and life. Went on to Penn, which was local. I had a scholarship there. Then I went on to Yale Law School because it had the reputation, properly so, being the best law school in the country. And I wanted to have, you know, an experience outside of Philadelphia and outside of the traditional way, and that worked out, and etc. But an important part of all this is that you can't understand me unless you understand, one, the immigrant background, and also my very strong Jewish persona. I mean, my Judaism was always very important to me, not in a theological sense, but that's who I am, and that's who I was.
So how does that...
And before I even knew the term, the notion of tikkun olam, repair of the world, the notion that, you know, in your little way, whatever little part of the road you touch, you're supposed to make it better.
Now, you've been consistent in that. I've been saying that, you've been saying that. I want to get you to the point where you decided you wanted really to be the dean of a business school, that you had ideas that were not really out there yet, or there, once again, as with the legal profession, the drifts weren't the way you wanted them. So now you were going to take this rich background of commitment to the public good, and you were going to move into a leadership position within academia outside of Berkeley, as it turned out. And I'd like, therefore, for you to say a few words about the St. Mary's experience. You came back to us, but you did take early retirement before the early retirement system. So, but you were still a professor at Berkeley, because that is one of the virtues of our campus. They never let us go, and that's good.
Well, the St. Mary's thing is that after I left, I took the early retirement in '91. People kept on saying, "Oh, you know, you'll just be snapped up by institutions, you know, with your background and everything." Well, there was one little thing that I didn't fully appreciate, and consciously appreciate, is Sandra was in a very responsible, Sandra was professionally involved. It wasn't, you hadn't come to the Jewish home yet, but, and the two of us weren't going to go anywhere geographically, really. In some sense, my thick head didn't think that through, that my range was going to be fairly limited geographically. And also what I was looking for was, all my life I had been in, you know, large premier research universities. And I guess here once again, romantically, I wanted to be Mr. Chips at a small liberal arts college where I would be part of a total university academic life. I could help work with faculty, with students. And lo and behold, here about a year later, it turned out that St. Mary's College was looking for a dean. And a member of the faculty approached me and said, "I think you should look into it." So I did. And I thought, first of all, this kind of, you know, silly. What is a Catholic institution want with a Jewish dean? And I was told, no, 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 that's not part of the spirit here. And I had a background working closely with Christian institutions. I was involved with the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, which is a non-denominational institution, and become an adjunct faculty member, was on its board. So
a collection of theological colleges.
yes,
Rather than non-denominational.
nine institutions. It was a consortium, basically. And I'd become involved, and because it had a commitment that I felt was very, very important. There was a Center for Jewish Studies there, and multi-denominationalism in every respect. And lo and behold, I was asked to be the dean and to take a school of economics and business, which wasn't in great shape. And the administration was looking for someone who, you know, had a reputation, had both in academic terms and leadership terms and things like that.
And you had your healing function, your tikkun olam.
Yeah, that's right. To build something. I like to build things.
It came right to it. You were going to heal these divisions that were existing in that little.
Yeah. It was a wonderful period, and I was there for 5 years, and could very well have retired there. And the first several years were wonderful. I had a terrific cohort of deans and academic vice president with whom to work, and was able to really not just have an identity within my school, but on the campus as a whole, and worked within the campus as a whole, and helped integrate the school more so in the campus, because it was respected on the campus that I had a scholarly background, and also had a background in a social science and understood social science, and was identified intellectually. That's the best way I can put it.
And do you feel, Ed, because I remember the story very well, there was an administrative shakeup at the top. It was a Christian Brothers organization. They had some other ideas different from the ones that existed when you were first hired, a whole change of people there. But when you left, when you did leave, did you look back and think that you had accomplished something?
I thought that I had accomplished something, and this is what my colleagues across the campus said I had accomplished something. I mean, several faculty members who had been associate professors for years. And I always felt that one of the saddest positions on a campus is to be a lifelong associate professor. They were associate professors because they had not engaged in research after they got tenure, which came with associate professor at St. Mary's. And I was able to encourage several of them, look to, no one is expecting you. And all these people were basically economists. And saying no one's expecting you to write articles for American Economic, Review, but write some things that interest you in your field that are publishable. And they did. And I thought that was an accomplishment.
So you brought greater recognition to that group. You improved their positions. I think I recall you got them more solidly established in their institutions, and allowed them to feel to gain a strong measure of self-esteem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And why did I leave? Because the president came in after the president who'd been in that position for, I don't know, Brother Craig, not Brother Craig, Brother Mel, for over 20 years. Wonderful man, wonderful man, wonderful man. And they brought this guy in who was a young Christian brother who had been a dean of engineering or science at another Christian Brothers institution in Wisconsin. And we've all been part of the recruitment process, and you know, it's a show and tell in both parts. And this guy was young. He came across as dynamic. He came across as at a stage of life creativity, and he blew everyone out. You know, just blew it out in terms of the interview process. He was. Everyone was very impressed. It became very obvious very soon, unfortunately, that all the glitters wasn't gold. And he was a guy who turned out to be very insecure, very over his head. I mean, each of the deans had more experience, more wisdom, if you will, than he did. And he went into micromanagement, and he just took an institution that was working to go to the next level and tore what we had developed over the last 5 years. And it became obvious that as long as he was president, nothing positive was going to happen. And indeed, we were going to be very constrained in terms of what we could do.
And so you ran into a deep irony about institutions. The larger they are, the harder they are to change. The smaller they are, and when you went into it, you thought that, the smaller they are, I can have an impact, which you did. But the impact can be negative as well as positive.
Serendipity. I was walking on the campus. I ran into David Leonard in political science, who was also chair of the teaching programs in peace and conflict studies and political economy. And I had chaired political economy before during the 1980s, which was under LNS. And he saw me and he said, you know, we really, I'm looking for the chair of the Peace and Conflict Studies program. He said, you would come in with credibility and, you know, proven academic and leadership dimensions. And I spoke to Sandra, and to me it was sort of an obvious thing. So I came and it was up to 49% or something that you could draw a salary. And so I said yes. But then there was very quickly an add-on after I came. Berkeley was in the first year of a program funded by Rotary International. 7 institutions worldwide, which Berkeley was one, and Duke in North Carolina was the other in the United States. And the others were as far flung as Japan and Latin America and Europe, and established this program, Center for Studies in International Studies in Peace and Conflict Resolution. And I was asked, would I be willing to take this on? And I said yes, because this would have really pulled me up to full-time as opposed to partial appointment in Peace and Conflict Studies. It was the most wonderful thing that happened. One of my happiest years at Berkeley. Yes. I was doing things I really loved, and with people who were exceptional, with some of whom to this day I have not merely contact, but physical. When they came to the Bay Area, or when we went to England, Ireland, there were people there. It was a wonderful thing.
All right. Now look, this is a marvelous way for us to kind of go back into your life.
Right.
Here, the 21st century is just around the corner. Well, it's just coming around the corner. There you are. You've got these programs at Berkeley. The happiest time of your academic life, Ed. All right. Let's go back a little bit. Let's go back to the 1960s. Let's go back over that long period. You know,
yeah.
You've done so many things. Toward your, now I may be taking you too literally, and you can correct that. To the happiest time, looking back on the Berkeley that you have known since 1964.
Right.
What was it about the Rotary experience in particular that made it the happiest? That is, why weren't the intervening years as happy, or were they, or am I not phrasing it well?
Well, okay. I had happy years on the Berkeley campus. That's, it's not that I was unhappy. When I left, I wanted to repot myself when I left in 91 and have this new experience and being somewhere else. I was half of my life. I left when I was 54. And in terms of academic life, I figured another 15, 18 years, whatever. So, and also Berkeley had changed in this way, and Sheldon and I have often discussed it. When I left in 91, I could call up virtually anyone on campus and just call them directly and set up a time to get together. I think it was Sandy Elberg, who was Dean of the Graduate Division for many years. I could call up Sandy. I didn't have to go through 3 secretaries and assistants. And in other people on campus, I knew these people because it was small enough that even with the size of Berkeley, there was still intimacy in terms of, particularly in leadership, relation. When I came back to an institution that I really didn't recognize. Levels of bureaucracy have been established. They're in positions where it was, you cut to the chase and got immediately to the person that you really wanted to talk to. Here, you went through assistants and assistants to the assistants. I mean, it had become corporatized. I mean, this was not used in Berkeley. It was higher education and types of institutions like Berkeley. And to me, this was a significant change that, having been away a few years, was rather striking. Berkeley gave me an opportunity to build something, to take a major that was not at the top of its game and had lost some of its reputation. And also, here was this inchoate new center that had to be shaped and needed leadership and had to be introduced to the campus and had to be done so by someone who had credibility on the campus. And it's like here too, when we go back to my coming to Berkeley, I had the opportunity to work in a new field that didn't exist. That where Berkeley was at one of the initial institutions, initial meaning literally less than a handful, to establish teaching programs in what today we call business and society, business and public policy, to widen, to broaden out the heavily economic focus that business schools had. So when I came to Berkeley, I could appreciate, because I hadn't been there before, that this was a developmental situation and also a situation where, as the next generation after the Dalvotos of the world It was my generation. And it's, all these things have a common denominator of creating something, of sort of going beyond the status quo, of having the satisfaction of developing.
And you would conclude that the Berkeley that you had known, maybe today, I don't know, we've been out of the game for a little bit, was flexible enough to allow for these innovative thrusts. People were accommodating, and that would be a strength of Berkeley, you think, in the days?
Yes, it was. I mean, for example, I had offers from other institutions. Here there wasn't an offer because it was mutually understood that I was not the type of fish for the Harvard Business School. I never could have functioned there. Its whole ethos, they're preparing the economic elites, the management elite, the business elite of America and the world. And yes, I mean, there was scholarly work done there, and a few people who became, very good friends and highly respected. In fact, were very helpful when I needed outside letters for promotion and giving me very strong letters. But it was not me. I would have been totally a misfit. The public university ethos, a sense that our students, that they didn't have, was the thing that at a place like Harvard, and also I visited for a semester at Dartmouth, at Amos Tuck, another highly reputable business school, where there was a sense of entitlement among students. What are you going to do today in class that's going to give me value added for my career? Well, all students want value added, but there wasn't the sense of the attitude, I'm paying you, deliver something valuable to me.
That's a really, I think, a very pregnant point to make. Suppose, Ed, thinking in a fantastic way, you were to go back into the undergraduate classroom today. Let's
Right.
suppose the vigor, the strength, all of that, things that we don't quite have it the same way anymore. Suppose we had them and we went back into the undergraduate classroom today. What would you like to teach? What do you think would be really an important subject to teach?
Political economy. That's the best way to put it.
In the 18th century sense?
No. Well, we could start there, really. Take things I had done from various aspects of my career, like starting off this new field of the social and political environment of business, and developing into ethics, developing into focus and opportunities to work internationally from places from Indonesia to Israel to Australia. It's to integrate all these facets of my academic experience to build something, to build a major that really would reflect that. That would be fun.
But that's what you were doing from the start. So what you would be adding to, I'm just going back to the fact that I find this consistency in your life, this thread that runs all the way through it. This is what you sort of had in your head when you started, but what you would bring now to it would be the added experience that you've gained.
Exactly, totally.
But you're staying true to yourself, my dear friend.
Yeah.
Yourself.
Also, my career also brought out something that I guess I really didn't know that I had. I'm a risk taker. I was a risk taker in the sense that I started off practicing law, which never thought I'd be doing anything else. And, that was sort of from the get-go in my life. And I wasn't finding the type of satisfaction I hoped for. And here I had this opportunity in a place I've never been with people I never met really, and going into a totally different world, which I only knew really as a student. Further risk is not going on for the PhD, but doing it with the law degree and the master's. And serendipity, once again, I mentioned my experience in law school where I did a project looking at corporate political activity. And it led to the publication of a book called The Corporation in American Politics, which was the first, I didn't know it, and some people are very strategic in terms of the research that they do. I just didn't, what interested me and what I thought I knew something about. Well, the book was seminal in schools of business and management. And it won me an award as a young faculty member right before the time I was coming up for tenure. And I helped develop an area of study within business schools looking at corporate political activity. This is a book that I'm also very proud of. It's in Japanese. It was given to me by colleagues at Meiji University. It's a collection of my work that they translated into Japanese. And then lastly, where is it?
Is that a golden bear?
That's a golden bear. That's right. Given to me by California Women's Lacrosse Team, where I served as a faculty advisor for a number of years.
A question that I think often appears in these legacy interviews. What advice would you give me as a young starter out, as to how to live in this complex academic environment?
Very complex environment. I think, first of all, unless you're able to really pursue your passion with regard to your scholarship, your teaching, and unless you can do this in an environment where you feel comfortable with regard to the values of the institution and of your department or the people with whom you are working, unless you feel comfortable, unless it offers your spouse, your partner, all the opportunities that she wants and needs, because she's been the joint risk taker along with you, and because more than anything, your marriage is the most important, the most sacred alliance. You feel you can have the type of academic life you want and at a personal level in which you can live the way you want. It's not a place for you. And I realize that at times you may not have the choice right away or whatever, but you should keep your eyes open, do your work while you're here, try to build your record while you're here, but then the opportunity comes to go elsewhere. Berkeley afforded me great latitude in what I did during my years at the university in terms of both my teaching and my research. I taught in 3 schools over the course of my years here. A Haas school, Berkeley Business School, obviously, which was my base. International and Area Studies and the College of Letters and Sciences, Political Economy and Peace and Conflict Resolution, specific areas. Then lastly, the law school, where I taught a course in election law, particularly as it affected corporations and labor unions. That's one thing. Secondly, I had the freedom to teach in several different areas. My work in corporate political activity, which is one of my major areas, particularly as regarded to corporate involvement in the electoral process, campaign contributions. Secondly, this inchoate field when I started in it of corporate social responsibility and the opportunity to be part of its development, both here at Berkeley and as well as nationally and even internationally through opportunities I had to teach abroad and participate in international meetings, conferences. And thirdly, in the area of business ethics, where I was part of getting it really established here in Berkeley and also internationally, and particularly Jewish business ethics, which rarely was included in the what contributed to getting business ethics very much involved in management education. Also, I'd like to point out that my work was empirical as well as conceptual. I won't call the philosophical, I don't know what is that, but conceptual in terms of framing the field of corporate political activity, as well as social or business organizations. And I did that both domestically and internationally when I was on sabbaticals and had an opportunity to do research in England and Israel with regard to the social role of key economic institutions there. So the international component is something that was very important to me and facilitated. And it was also facilitated in these things by the Woodrow Wilson Center, where I was a Wilson Fellow for a year, and gave me sort of research freedom, writing freedom that can never be emulated except in an institution of that character. I also, my work, my research also had very unexpected practical significance. My Israeli research I did during sabbatical and a paper I gave looking at the dilemma in terms of the social and economic roles of the Histadrut and the Histadrut enterprises became a feature of a colloquium in Israel celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Israeli enterprises, and was picked up by Israel's leading economic journal, something of importance in this whole debate. And also my work on campaign contributions here too was during the 70s and early 80s, I was one of the significant contributors to looking at what the role of corporations was in political action committees and leading questions or raising questions about its corporate power and the testimony before Congress and things of this nature. So my work, not intended at the outset, but had had policy implications in the in terms of real life issues, which I thought was something that I really wanted to do. Also, a leadership role at Berkeley. Of course, the Academic Senate was involved, very primary role that I played, but also I chaired the Berkeley Emeritus Association and chaired the Faculty Advisory Committee to the Athletic Studies Center. It's mentioned just two items, and also spent over 10 years serving as the faculty mentor to the women's lacrosse team. The type of contribution and fun things that I did at Berkeley. And in the general community, of all things, I was on the board of the Graduate Theological Union, of the American Baptist Homes of the West. I got involved with religious communities, which later, here once again, there was nothing strategic about it, but later became, if you will, an important factor in my being asked to and my agreeing to be the Dean of the School of Economics and Business at Graduate Theological Union. These are important things, and general community. And, it's and I guess the thing that was very gratifying for me after I finished my term as Senate Chair was a group of faculty who sent me a recognition acknowledging me for my integrity, courage and leadership during some very difficult times serving as the chair of the Berkeley division. In that theme, others reinforced in different types of acknowledgments that I received. And that meant a great deal to me because I had always sought first and foremost integrity. You can have all sorts of distinctions, but in integrity, if you don't have that, then you're not truly a leader, or a person in the ethical sense of what a person is. And it also helps being courageous in difficult times and the leadership aspect. These were very, very meaningful things for me. I received this outside of the university setting. When I finished my directorship of the Rotary Center for International Studies and Peace and Conflict Resolution, the chairman of the Rotary Foundation also sent me an acknowledgement emphasizing the same terms. So to me, that was these acknowledgements were more important than some of the things that are more formalistic recommendations, because this went to the heart of the type of life I was trying to live and the type of life where it was infused with my Jewish values, which once again, in the Book of Micah it said, Book of Micah, it would say, what does God ask of me? But to do justly, to be compassionate to your fellow human beings, and to walk humbly with your God. Well, I don't know if I achieved all that, but I tried. I want to recognize my children, something that deserves very important emphasis in terms of the contribution that Mimi and Dan and when he joined the family, my son-in-law made to my life of being at my back at all times, going along with my wife, which at times intruded on their own. When we went off on sabbaticals for a year, they left their friends, they left their schools, they left their life. And yes, that they had very important contributions to their life, but still, and they went along with me. And at times my absences when I taught abroad, and just being there and being the good people and the contributing people that they are. Mimi, through her work in the area of serving the needs of families and children with special needs, very personal, very direct, having great impacts. In terms of Dan, his work with the U.S. State Department for over 25 years, in which he is still involved domestically and abroad to try to facilitate and contribute to U.S. policy and its implementation in places in sub-Saharan Africa, in China, and elsewhere. And then that, through his rabbinic leadership, contributing to the lives of many, many people over the course of the years. Very proud of them and feel very blessed by the lives that they lived. And my two grandchildren who are still in earlier stages of life, and what can I say? Grandchildren are grandchildren, and embodying love at its best.
Ed, we're coming to the end of the interviews. It was wonderful to speak to an old friend and to listen to you put together, hear you put together your thoughts. I think that we're still alive. Therefore, what are you doing today?
I keep very busy being the life partner. Without her, as she was from the get-go, we're joined at the hip and joined in the head.
Thank you, my dear friend. On behalf of the Emeritus Association, on behalf of everyone else, and on behalf of me, your lifelong friend.
Right.
And made possible by the fact that we were in a particular university at a particular time.
Exactly.
Long life, Ed.
All of you, I'm deeply honored to have been asked to provide this oral history. Deeply honored.